Who and what makes up God? I don't know if I can do that justice without doing some development, some background development. There is, inside the human psyche, a built-in mechanism to protect ourselves from things that frighten us. And when we have a fear about our environment or things in the environment, maybe in early anthropology it could have been thunder or lightning or an animal that's attacking us. But whatever it is, we have an area of our brain, our right hemisphere, that is activated, and other areas of the brain that are activated that allow us to survive perceptions that haunt us, frighten us, challenge us, oppress us. And anything in nature, and later on in society, that challenges us, we can activate an area of the brain that literally gives us a feeling of power over that which challenges us. For instance, we may perceive that we are challenged by thunder and lightning. And so we may create an area of the brain that, or create in that area of the brain, a God that overrides that which oppresses us. So the earliest anthropologically oriented gods that we have are actually emergent phenomenon in the brain that conquer those fears. Anything that we're frightened about, we tend to feel oppressed by, and so we end up creating something that conquers the oppressor. So there's a one-upmanship inside the brain that allows us to survive our challenges and oppressions. So the area of the brain that's involved are numerous. It used to be thought just one or two, but it's many areas now. But if we perceive that we're threatened by, again, the thunder or lightning, we'll create a thunder god or a lightning god to conquer, to appease that, or to appeal to that, to protect us from that which is challenging us. Later on, when we were not frightened so much by nature, but we were frightened by human beings. Because when we were out in nomadic states, we weren't frightened about another human being coming and killing us or conquering us as much as we were by the fears of animals and the natural events. But as we became more aware of our environment and understood what nature was and what thunder was and what lightning was and didn't have so much a fear about it, we and numbers of people grew in clusters, from families to kinship to clans to tribes to eventually cities. The power of one group of people overriding another person became more powerful in oppression and fear than nature. So then we started creating anthropomorphic gods. We started making gods in our own image because we were feeling oppressed by man or human beings. And so we created an anthropomorphic gods. We started out with many gods, sort of a polytheistic kind of a structure. And before that, even an animistic structure. Almost everything had little gods. And then eventually we integrated those until we had eventually an anthropomorphic and monotheistic God. And so there's an evolution from the many to the one, and there's an evolution from nature into humanity. And so that anthropomorphism, we started making the God in our own image, meaning that the things that we were feeling oppressed by were things that were inside our own nature. So in those cases, we started having anything that a human being could do. If we felt, let's say we were impoverished and we were in an area where there was differences in classes and difference in socioeconomics, there now becomes the rich versus the poor. And so the poor feel oppressed by the rich. So the poor would then create an anthropomorphic God that condemns the rich and that supports the meek and supports the poor to oppress the oppressor. Of course, then the rich, which usually had a little bit more intelligence, they would then use the God that the poor created to oppress the oppressor, to then say that the rules that they were going to govern with came from that God, and they would then upmanship over the poor by saying that the very gods that they're worshiping gave them the rules that they're going to rule them by. And now the new rules that oppressed them they would then tweak the God again and condemn anything that would oppress them again. And so this anthropomorphic form of divinity was literally an upmanship game, kind of a fighting game between the oppressor and the oppressed, and oppressing the oppressor, and then oppressing the oppressor of the oppressed, and this kind of thing. And so we later evolved this anthropomorphic kind of structure where now just about anything that we don't like, there's a God that basically condemns it. And we've made gods in our own image. And what's interesting, working with people with schizophrenia and people with various psychotic states, when they have been traumatized, when they've been turmoiled, when they've been tragic experiences, when there's been terrible in their minds or turmoil, many times the mind will dissociate to compensate for these experiences of their own perceptions of oppression. And they will create gods or iconographies of angelic states, or there's various names in various religions, but in order to compensate for that. I worked with a lady who felt that she had been tortured, and the very thing that she was tortured by, if we look at the content, she created gods and angels, which were spiritual experiences, that were counterbalancing that and oppressing that. So inside the brain, we have a built-in mechanism to assist us in surviving perceptions of turmoil, tragedies, oppressions, fears, challenges, etc. And it's a transient survival mechanism to endure these states. And when those calm down, so do the deities. In other words, when all of a sudden you're running down the street and all of a sudden a person comes with a hood on, it looks like possibly a person's going to knife you. You all of a sudden pull out a God and say, "Dear God, help me in this situation." And then when you find out he's just another runner, you let go of the God and get back to your running. So the moment we get the perception of stress or oppression or challenge or fear or these terribles, terrific turmoils, etc., we automatically bring in that area of the brain and we create these anthropomorphic gods. So that is the evolution of the gods within our psyche created by man. Now there's a question, did God make man in his image or her image or whatever, or did man make God in their image? And the answer appears to be both, from my understanding. So this is the anthropomorphic, this is the one that we've created in our own psyche, in our own brain to survive our oppressions and fears that we use to survive our anxieties. Then there is evidence, and this is something I've been very fascinated by for many years now, evidence of laws of the universe. Now these laws of the universe, law of gravity, the law of electromagnetism, the law of that we see in the principles of physics. These laws we could perceive, and there's been arguments in theology, that these laws imply there's some sort of lawgiver. And now there's arguments about whether or not man creates these mathematical laws to deal with his anxieties of the chaos and disorders of the world, or whether they're inherently in nature. I believe there's a little of both. But whatever it is, these principles or laws that do and govern nature, we could say those are expressions of some form of teleological, purposeful design. And there's evidence in, as you know, the breakthrough experience to show that there is synchronicities of complementary opposites that go on in our life that make us pause for thought to the possibility that there is an intelligence governing life. And if we look at even the greatest Nobel Prize winners in history still have to be humbled by the intricacies of simply the DNA or the intricacies of the cell, let alone billions of cells in an organism. And so we have to acknowledge that there is some form of structural integrity and intelligence going on in the world. And we could say that this is evidence for some form of intelligence. Now, we could say that these foldings of proteins and these tertiary structures of proteins that give rise to the things we see in organic living organisms as just biochemistry doing its job and has nothing to do with an intelligence. But the more we probe those subtleties in the chemistries and the entangled relationships between those chemistries inside a living cell, the more humble we are to whatever this is that's giving rise to it. So I believe that there is also a universal, if you will, intelligence, or at least a global intelligence that is governing life that transcends the anthropomorphic construct of God that we've given rise to. And I would say that this non-personified, universal, impersonal intelligence would probably be closer to what Albert Einstein called true religiosity. And then the anthropomorphic forms of religious construct are our survival mechanisms from our fears and our perceptions of oppression. And so I think that we've made gods in our own image through history and through the evolution of man. But I also believe that there is inherent intelligence in the universe that has been personified at different scales and given different terms. And those are where you might say divinity has made man in its image. And I think that the combination of those two must be entwined in our constructs of theology or constructs of divinity or idea of God. I like to call God the grand organized design, or the grand organized designer. I'm noticing that in the world that the majority of conflicts in the world are the anthropomorphic deity interactions, you might say. But the ones that actually unify the world is the more universal one. The study of mathematics and the elegant mathematical structures, I believe have access, or we have, if we really probe it, we have access to unifying the world. But the anthropomorphic ones, because it's individualized based on what challenges individual value systems, tend to fragment and create the conflicts in the world. So I think that we have a God that actually gives birth to separations and divisions of people. And we also have, in a sense, the God that's universal, that we, if we're humble enough to probe the mysteries of, come to sit in a state of awe because of the mysteries that it reveals.